Is there anything new taking place in our public education system to prepare children to live and work in a global economy? Find out on Talking with Henrietta, coming up next. Hi, I'm Henrietta. Welcome to the show. More and more families are falling below the poverty line in the U.S., and some indicators show that American students are lagging far behind when it comes to having the necessary skills that will allow them to have well-paying jobs to take care of themselves and their families in the future. On this show, I'll talk with several educators about whether children are currently getting the types of learning experiences they need to become well-rounded, competent, and financially independent adults. Seated to my right is Ann Campbell, who is the superintendent of the San Mateo County Office of Education. In her current position, which she's held since 2010, she oversees 90,000 students, more than 5,000 teachers, 182 schools, and 23 school districts. Immediately beside me on my left is Kristen Wynn, who is the San Mateo County Office of Education's Coordinator for Science and Engineering. She has held her position for 2 years. Prior to this, she served for 10 years as a middle school science teacher. On my far left, seated beside Kristen, is Rebecca Vaiduna, who is the director of the STEM Center for the San Mateo County Office of Education. She previously worked for the South San Francisco Unified School District and the Cambridge Public Schools in the greater Boston area. Well, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me. I said in my introduction that students needed to have the type of learning experiences that would enable them to become well-rounded, competent, and financially independent adults. Is that the purpose of education?
I think that's one of the important functions of education, absolutely. I think we want, especially as we think about the future and the kind of world that our kids are going to be living in, we want them to be well educated, we want them to be able to think critically and creatively, want them to be able to communicate effectively, work with other people, and certainly we're in such a technologically heavy world now that they have the skills to be able to integrate technology effectively into their lives.
Well, what Ann said is really a tall order. Do you think that's being done now?
I think there are really tremendous things happening right now in education. We are in a really pivotal moment with the adoption of the Common Core standards. Never before have we had a movement like that where the majority of the states are on board. And it's giving us a great opportunity to really prepare students to be successful in college and career.
I'll get back to the Common Core standards, but Kristen, is education, the way it's being delivered now, reaching, or at least reaching the goals that Ann just now described for each child?
Is it reaching each child now? I think it's going to much better with the new standards, and science has the next generation standards that have recently been adopted by the state of California. And its whole goal is to get students college and career ready, but also to be good citizens. Like Ann was saying, these are the kids who are going to be voting on current ballot measures that involve environmental issues, privacy issues with technology, and the whole gamut of things that we need to be concerned with. So every student needs to be scientifically literate and STEM literate so that they can make educated choices and make good decisions.
Are we there? Are we close to being there?
We have a long, long way to go. And I think that what we have learned from our experiences with public education over the last 10 to 15 years is we have been so focused on testing our kids on discrete skills that we haven't really prepared them to be the kinds of individuals that I described in response to your first question. And it's certainly true with children who are living in poverty are tending in their schools not to get what they need. And I think as we move towards the Common Core and as we move towards the new assessment, the Smarter Balanced Assessment, that what we're going to see is that teachers will be able, rather than trying to cover a miles wide of material, they'll be able to really go in depth. So that if you look at math, for example, rather than feeling they've got to get through a math textbook that's that thick, starting in September going to June, they will really have a very definite set of math concepts that kids in that particular grade level need to master. And they will work very hard in a variety of ways to get student mastery of those concepts. So it's a very different approach to education than we've been taking. And the same is certainly true in the field of language arts as well, in reading. Those are incredibly important skills, reading and being able to write and communicate effectively. But we've been so focused on testing reading ability by testing specific vocabulary words on a multiple choice test. We haven't been really getting kids to think critically about the reading that they're doing, and do they really understand a science piece, as Kristen was talking about, so that they can make an informed decision about climate change, for example. Do they just believe what they may see on television or on the internet without really knowing how to delve down and know if they've got the skills to understand that?
Sure, that's absolutely fascinating. Rebecca, you're the one who talked about the core subjects or
The Common Core.
Mm-hmm. What is it?
So it's
And what makes it so different from what education centered on in the past?
In the past, with the No Child Left Behind Act, all states had individual learning standards for the content areas, for reading and writing and math and all of that. And their tests would hold their students accountable to their individual state standards. The Common Core standards is one set of standards that are adopted by almost all of the states. And all the states adopt them as is, with the option of adding up to an additional 15%. In California, that is the case with us, that we did do that. But we all have that same core set of standards, and it just really opens the door to kind of the opportunity to collaborate nationally on how best, what our best practices, what our best instructional strategies.
Well, before we get into what the Common Core consists of, how did that come about? Were all of the 50 states agreed?
Well, basically, the governors of the state said, you know, students who are graduating high school now are not prepared for the global economy. And if the United States is going to remain globally competitive, our students need to have a very different skill set than they've had before. So the governors and the Council of Chief School Officials came together in 2010 and said, this is silly. Each state has its own academic standards. We're all going off in these different directions. We would be so much better served if we came together, agreed upon Common Core standards, and then we can share best teaching practices. We can share all kinds of ways to really make sure that kids are understanding the standards. And there's a misconception out there that these are national, federal standards, and that's absolutely not true. They're standards that have come from the states working together, which is very different than it being a federally mandated way of going about educating kids.
I find what you said fascinating, that kids will have a different set of skills than what they were being taught before. What were they being taught before, and how is it that this will give them a different set of skills?
So I think Anne spoke a little bit about that already, but in the past, it really varied from state to state. But speaking in California, it was kind of a long list, and some people go so far as to call it a mile wide and inch deep. So really so many different things to tackle, and a lot of very discrete skills. An example of that would be in the subject of writing. There were, I can't remember how many, but upwards of 20 different types of writing that teachers were teaching. But with the Common Core standards, instead, it's more focused on 3 different types of writing, expository and narrative and so on. And it's not to say that those 20 different types aren't important. A friendly letter is an important skill to learn. But all of that needs to fall into those 3 different buckets of writing. So it's really more of a simple and focused way of looking at learning. That's just one small example.
I think the other thing that's going on with Common Core as well, in addition to the content of reading, language arts, and mathematics, and as the next generation science standards come on board, there certainly is content that needs to be learned. You need to learn how to read, you need to know your basic math. But there are also skills that are very, very critical for being successful in the global marketplace. And in addition to the content, the Common Core very much emphasizes skills such as collaboration. So you'll see a lot of group work happening with kids working together on a project. Communication certainly, and being able to communicate in the different writing forms that Rebecca just mentioned, but lots of other ways of communicating as well. How do you make an effective presentation using different computer presentations? And then as well, certainly critical thinking. And one thing that America has been known for over time is incredible creativity. And we want to be sure that kids are having that opportunity in school to really blossom as far as their creative side is concerned.
Well, I can think of one thing that's very different, and you mentioned computers, and that certainly has changed the whole dimension, added a whole completely dimension, which I would think would very much change the way things are being done. Has it?
I think our schools have struggled with that. We all recognize that computers and other devices have become so important in our lives, and we know that we need to prepare students to engage with those devices and be proficient, but we don't always have the technology in our schools to do so. And we have also struggled with making sure that our teachers and our all the faculty in a school district have the training to integrate that technology thoughtfully. And so that is an ongoing challenge. That's something that we work on very hard at the County Office of Education.
Well, we have been talking about having our children prepared to work and live in a global economy. Where are they now in comparison not only to other countries, but in terms of the United States? How do the children rank?
Well, it depends. I think if you look internationally, there are a variety of different ways that children's skills are measured in mathematics and English language arts and science. There's the TIMSS, which is the math science study that's done internationally. There's PISA. Within the United States, we do the NAEP. When we compare ourselves to other countries, it depends a little bit on which test that you're looking at. But we have gone from being really at the head of the pack to being more in the middle. Countries like Singapore, Korea, Japan, and Finland have really exceeded and surpassed us. And I think the United States used to be #1 in the world in graduating people from college. And right now, we've moved to 16th in the world in terms of the percentage of our population. If you are a kindergartner living in poverty and you begin kindergarten, only 10% of that kindergarten class will ultimately end up with a college degree. So there's
now, does that matter where you live? I know it does matter where you live.
Yeah.
Does it matter in terms of the area of the country?
Well, certainly there are some states, Massachusetts we were talking about earlier as we were getting ready for your show tonight. There are certain states that are far exceeding other states, and they're actually right up there with Singapore and Korea and those countries. So yes, you're better off to be in certain areas of the country. Certainly as far as if we look at California schools, for example, where you go to school makes a huge difference in terms of the opportunities that you have. Rebecca was talking about technology. In San Mateo County, I can take you to a school where there are 1-to-1 iPads for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and I can take you to another school that has 20 Chromebooks for its entire school. So that inequity is huge. And one of the real important priorities as we move forward with the Common Core content standards is to say we live in a world of technology, and to have that type of a situation existing in San Mateo County in the middle of Silicon Valley is horrible, because it means that that opportunity gap, basically this group of students ends up with resources and the skills and technology that they need to go out and thrive, and this group of students hasn't had a chance to do that, and so they don't have that same opportunity.
And some would say that that's not accidental in terms of how things have evolved. What would be your perspective on that?
How do you mean? Can you explain that a little?
Well, just the fact that more affluent communities have students who are doing much better than those that are lower income communities. We've known that all along. So what's different in terms of that? And how do
Well,
we
I mean, one of the-
close the gap? And I don't mean to leave you out of this conversation.
I'm learning as well as you are, so you're fine. I'll pipe in when I'm.
Yes, I mean, as someone who moved here from Massachusetts in schools to South San Francisco, I was very surprised at the differences. And I do think I was in a school that was serving an underserved population in San Mateo County, and was very surprised at the lack of resources, and really struggled with how to focus priorities with very, very little money on preparing students. And I really resonate with what Ann just said, because I used to worry all the time. Sometimes it would keep me up at night because I would think, I might be graduating a 5th grader who has only touched a computer keyboard once or twice in all those years. I mean, it really is like that. I mean, in that particular community, I can't speak, doesn't seem to me that there are obvious intentional things going on, but I think that inequities have perpetuated over time that are very, very difficult. And one of the ways that I've seen that as a school principal, as a former school principal, is in communities that have neighborhood segregation, where kids are walking to school, and because they're walking to school and there is no busing or anything like that, the schools really become very, very segregated within a given community, and there are all sorts of things that arise when you have that situation. And in Cambridge, there is a huge effort to eliminate that through busing. And when I came to California, I learned very quickly that that doesn't happen here as much because it costs so much money in there, and there's no money here to do that sort of thing. And that's something that I saw when I moved here.
Well, it's very interesting. People have said if you take the money that would be spent in busing and put it in those schools that have less resources, wouldn't that be a better solution? And I'm wondering, if you can have Common Core standards, can't you then, the governors get together, or the powers that be get together and say, we're going to allocate, for these Common Core standards to work, we're going to allocate the same amount of money to make sure each child has the necessary resources.
Sure. And I think actually if you look at California's new school funding model, it really is trying to do exactly that. And it's trying to say, we have students in our state who are living in poverty, who are learning English, who are foster youth, who we need to be devoting more resources to. And so, school district, we're going to give you a certain amount of money, and then for each student that you have that fits in one of those categories, we're going to give you extra dollars. And if you have a concentration of those students over 55%, we're going to give you additional funding as well. Because I think there's a realization that throughout California there have been huge inequities in school funding, and that the kids who need those funds the most often aren't getting what they need. And just within our county alone, in San Mateo County, we have 23 different school districts. We have one school district that's spending almost $20,000 per student when you take what they get from their property taxes, from their foundation, and from their parcel tax. We have another one right next door to that school district that's spending about $7,500 per student per year. That's a huge, huge gap.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And you just kind of wonder how these inequities are allowed to exist, or that people don't care, or is it that they do care? And what difference will it make? What difference will it make in terms of job opportunities if everybody has a similar access to education?
Well, I think that's why a lot of us are in the jobs we are in. We are very compelled to make that happen.
But would the jobs be there? You know, there's some people, some economists think, well, it takes a certain level of unemployment for the whole economy to work. Would all of the students who want to go to college, would it be practical to have everybody going to college? Can the economy accommodate all of the students who have the Common Core skills that you're talking about?
I don't have the expertise to answer that question, but I would love to be in the situation where we have to figure that out. I would love to be at a point where we're going, is this going to work? Because all of our kids are being able to access
Do we have enough
and
colleges?
be successful in college. That would be a great problem to have right now compared to where we're at.
I guess whether every child goes to college or not, I think that's a personal decision, but every child ought to have the opportunity to go
Right.
and to be successful and to have the skill set needed to succeed. If we think about the economy in our country and what's happening globally, Korea is graduating something like 60% of its kids are college graduates, and their economy is thriving. So that tends to indicate to me that if you can get your populace educated at that level, they will go out and generate the type of economy that will continue to expand and involve people.
So what will that do with the prison system, for instance? I say that because California's State Attorney General Kamala Harris said that by the time, and you can tell me if you've seen this, if a student drops out of school by the 3rd grade, then that child is most likely to wind up in prison.
88% of students who are prisoners were not reading proficiently in the third grade. So there's a real, and you know, if you talk with the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office, they will say that they really, in the criminal justice system, plan the number of beds that they will need to accommodate prisoners based upon 3rd grade reading scores, and they look at what the proficiency levels are. So that's rather sobering to think about.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And I guess my hope would be, in California, we are spending so much on our prison system. In the United States in general, we're spending a lot on prisons. It would be such a better investment early on to educate in quality early care and education for kids before they ever get to school, and then to invest in our schools. And it's somehow figuring out, how do you turn the system upside down so that that can happen?
Well, you know, I'm thinking you're talking, being educators interested in children from a humanistic point of view. You're not talking as someone who's investing, looking at your bottom line in prisons. So when you talk about turning things upside down, I guess it would be a matter of turning things upside down. And we've talked about, we at least when I introduced you all, I talked about STEM. So precisely, and it seems there's going to be an emphasis on STEM. So let's talk about STEM. What is it, and why is it going to be so important?
So STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And I think Anne spoke already to how important it is, and especially that T, that technology is coming into play a lot. We really are connecting STEM in many different ways, but very important right now, thinking about early learning and STEM, even in mathematics. So when you were just mentioning earlier that the California prison system calculates bed space based on 3rd grade reading scores, we have some new research that has been very intriguing to us about early math skills, and that before students enter kindergarten, their math abilities then are an even better predictor of their reading ability later in school.
Before they enter kindergarten? What type of math ability?
So at that level,
to know that they have 2 shoes?
Yes, actually, that is so.
Counting objects.
Yes, counting or understanding how to count objects, how to one-to-one correspondence, that you can group things and sort things,
Patterns,
and colors and shapes
similarities.
and patterns and all those things. So we're putting a lot of time and energy into working at that really early stages, because we know how important that is.
Now, is that fair? And maybe it's not a question of whether it's fair to look at those pre-kindergarten skills of counting when there is so much that can be done in terms of education itself. Well, what's the purpose and what's the correlation between that pre-kindergarten ability to do that basic math and having a good teacher who can do a lot of teaching in terms of improving
And that is
this?
absolutely true. There is really fascinating data about how far a good teacher can take a student. And I believe it's with a really strong teacher, a student can make 2 years worth of gains in 1 year's time. So that is definitely true. But when you think about, in San Mateo County and really which is indicative of anywhere in the nation, when you have kids entering kindergarten in one school who possibly haven't held scissors before or held a pencil or thought about colors or shapes or anything like that, and then you go into another school and kids are literally walking into kindergarten fully reading already. And those schools are resourced differently too. So you can imagine how it's really hard, even if you have the best teachers ever, there's still a lot of challenges. And I always think, education really starts the moment a baby is born. It's
or
not
before.
Yeah, and before, right.
Before.
And so there are really a lot of opportunities there to make sure that those formative early experiences are happening to support their
Kristen,
learning.
I'd love to get you involved, and I think you were going to say something.
Well, I was going to say with the initiative, getting 4-year-olds in kindergarten will be helpful as well.
Now, a lot has been made over nature and nurture. Is there a preponderance of emphasis on, well, for educators, you're certainly on the nurturing.
Well, I think that we've learned so much more about human brain development, and we continue to learn more and more. But what it's telling us, the research is showing us that from the time a child is born to the age of 5, 80% of the human brain develops. And if you think that that's going on in that time period, it's absolutely vital that kids have quality early care and education.
If 80% of the brain develops by the age of 5, what happens over a lifetime in terms of the other 20%?
Well, basically what happens then is as you get to school, then your brain starts, when you're in those 0 to 5 years, your brain is just taking in all kinds of sensations and registering them all. And then what starts to happen is your brain does what's called pruning. So as you go through school and you learn more, some of the things you don't really need to keep in your brain get pruned down, but then you're able to focus on the ones that really help you move through school with the subjects that are there. But I would say, in San Mateo County, we're working really in a very focused way right now to be sure that that 0 to 5 population gets what they need, so that when they walk through the door in kindergarten, you don't have the kind of opportunity gap that Rebecca just described. And it seemed, I always thought, well, kindergarten ready, what does that mean? You walk through let's start school. Kindergarten ready actually is important, and it means that a child has the fine motor skills that they need to be able to begin to do schoolwork, that they have the social skills, they know about taking turns, and that they have the kinds of basic math concepts and literacy concepts that Rebecca has described. And we don't want to have that opportunity gap. So we have started something called the Big Lift in San Mateo County that's a community-wide collaborative effort that brings together the world of public education, the County of San Mateo, the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and a variety of nonprofit organizations and community partners to say, okay, it is not acceptable to us that 42% of third graders leave third grade in San Mateo County not reading proficiently. And when you start really looking at the research about what contributes to proficiency in reading, that early education experience is huge. And so we're working very hard, and particularly in our underserved communities, to put together community partnerships to make sure that our 3 and 4-year-olds have that kind of access to quality preschool that they need, that will help really get them launched so that they are truly kindergarten ready.
So what you've talked about, is this something that's going to be laid out or rolled out over a period of time? It started? It started now?
The Big Lift?
The Big Lift.
It started now. Yeah, I don't know as much about the Big Lift.
Actually, the Big Lift, it's tremendously exciting. The County Board of Supervisors from their Measure A fund said, okay, Big Lift, we believe in what you're doing. We're going to give you $10 million over the next 2 years to begin this work. But you have to go out and find more money. So we've been spending the last 6 months really exploring different ways to bring additional dollars in. And what we're expecting to be able to do is this spring to begin putting together the actual local community partnerships, having them apply for funding, and we hope to really by January of 2015 be started.
So we talk about preparing students for a global economy, and that assumes we know what that global economy is
That's so
going to
true.
look like. And so what do we know already, and what are we projecting?
Well, one thing we have to keep in mind is we have to prepare kids for jobs that we don't even imagine right now. They're changing so fast, and the global economy of the future is not the global economy now. So that's why the Common Core and the Next Generation Science Standards are preparing kids to be critical thinkers, to be better learners, so that they are prepared for any job that comes up on the horizon. So they need to learn just communication skills, collaboration skills, so that they can be good learners. We were talking about the brain research and what research is telling us about students, and what it takes to be an efficient learner is to make connections and build on background knowledge and do all the big picture things, as well as the small tasks and the factoids of science, as we like to call them, or we used to call them. So now it's more about learning the concepts in a collaborative way, so that they're just better, more efficient learners.
So we're talking about, and hold that point, Rebecca, we're talking about competition, but at the same time, we're talking about collaboration.
Yeah, we don't like to say competition anymore. We actually are talking about world collaboration, not competition.
You were going to say, Rebecca? I mean, when I grew up, it was competitive. And I'm thinking when students go off to college, it's competitive. I mean, you know, you're competing against others who might have 4.0 averages. And so at what point do we get from competition to collaboration? And if you're doing the collaborating, at what point do you, lose the edge yourself? Or do you lose the edge if you're collaborating rather than being trained to compete?
One of the things that I remember that really struck me when I read the Common Core Standards, and at the time I was a principal, was I love seeing all the collaboration, that's great, but I also love the language around the importance of being able to construct a viable argument and critique the reasoning of others. And so that could get competitive, you know, because the idea really is to be able to debate well and to have your point for a reason, you know, be able to back your point up, but also be able to listen critically to others. And I think that immediately when I thought of that, I thought this is going to be great for middle school, because wow, do they love debating. You know, they really like that. I mean, all kids really do, but I feel like in middle school there's a special place in their heart for that. And so I think it's collaboration, but it's a collaboration in the service of critical thinking and learning. And so yeah, I think there is some healthy competition there that is okay.
But I also think, you know, if you look at a company like Google, for example, which is certainly competitive in the world market, and you go and you visit the Google campus, that campus is intentionally set up for collaboration to occur amongst the employees, because they realize that through that collaboration they are able to come up with even better ideas than one individual.
That's interesting. America has always been a land that has stressed individuality and individual initiative. And so have we changed things in some way? Is this a subtle change?
I don't think so. I mean, I think Anne spoke about it really earlier on, about we kind of lost sight of the whole child, and we were a little bit more focused on these discrete skills. But even back then, you know, we knew it was important to collaborate. We knew that we wanted to create children who were able to work together, and we tried to do that as best we could in that scenario. What I like now is that the Common Core has the content focus up, but it's really also about all of the thinking around the content and all of the work that goes into collaborating.
That's a really interesting question about, you know, Americans as rugged individuals who are out there exploring the world, whatever.
Yes, the entrepreneur,
Right,
and there's
exactly.
certain characteristics of
But it's also about relationship building and having that collaboration and knowing who to know and what to do in certain situations. I know that in certain industries, like my husband is in construction, and it used to be that you just knew your skill and you could do a good job. You just kept your head down and did your job, and it's not that way anymore. And he's been in that industry for 30 years. It's much more about relationship building and collaboration.
And I think even when you're an entrepreneur, you realize that you can't do it all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That you need to have
Alone,
a team
yes.
behind you, and yes, to be able to delegate, and everybody pulling his own weight or her own weight.
You know, I think when you think about America too, I think we've always valued hard work. And I think one of the things that we're trying to really foster in school is a love of learning, a love of working. So you really do want to devote yourself, heart and soul, to whatever it is that you're interested in pursuing. And that no matter who you are and where you go to school, you should be able to develop the skills to follow that passion and to do that hard work as you move forward.
Now, we have been talking about the brain research and being fully functional and competent. And we've also been emphasizing STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And I'm wondering if the emphasis, because of our technological world, has been taken off of the arts. And there is something called STEAM, and there is something called whole brain, which is right brain and left brain. So where is all of the whole brainness in the equation?
I believe in education that we have gotten so far away from the arts, and particularly in a state like California that has gone through such a difficult budget period, only the essential common core curricular subjects have been focused on. And so schools that might have had visual arts programs or music programs, whatever they may have been, have lost those. And that's, every child should have access to the arts. And so one of the really wonderful parts about STEM is when you turn it into STEAM, you're able to make sure that those kinds of opportunities are there as well. And there's a really nice fit in many ways between the arts and science, technology, engineering, and math as well. But we have kind of put it over here in this compartment, and we haven't thought about how do you bring them together. And when people talk about STEAM, they're trying to say, okay, how do we integrate all of this so that that whole person you were talking about becomes a reality?
I've been reading that music helps one in terms of math, since so much of music involves math and the arts, and working that side of the brain also helps students stay in school, quite frankly.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering, with the Common Core, shouldn't that be as emphasized as much?
In some ways, I mean, I think we'll see more standards come up over time, but in some ways it is, because the Common Core standards for English language arts are not just for teachers of English language arts. They are actually called the Common Core State Standards for social studies, science, and technical subjects. So they apply to any classroom, and that is really an acknowledgement of something I think that all teachers have been feeling and saying in the background for a long time, which is that even if you're a science teacher, you're still a teacher of reading and writing, and so on. So there is further reach with the standards. And I hope that with some of the language around 21st century skills like collaboration and critical thinking, what we're going to start seeing, and we already really are, is more project-based learning, more units that are addressing multiple subject areas, and that's where you're going to see things like arts brought back into the classroom. As a principal, I remember many teachers, after they had read through the Common Core standards, just going, oh, this is so exciting. This is really why I wanted to teach, because this is how it should be integrated. Everything should be integrated. We shouldn't be thinking of these discrete, separate classes all the time. And I'm so excited to bring back some of those art units or other things, projects that they had done, inquiry-based learning, that kind of thing. And I think the Common Core is really going to encourage that.
You know, it's interesting, there's in San Mateo, Foster City, there's a middle school, the Bayside STEM Academy, which is focused on the STEM subjects, but they also make art a very important part of their curriculum. But for example, they have a dance teacher who teaches dance and teaches kids choreography. But when they do their productions, which they do twice a year, they base it upon something that they're studying in one of the STEM subjects. So, for example, they were studying plate tectonics and earthquakes in 6th grade science. They did a complete dance performance based upon tectonic plates. But it's an interesting way of trying to weave those subject areas together.
And you mentioned, when you talk about dance, it reminds me of the recess. And I think in some schools, recess was done away with. How could that possibly be?
But with the emphasis that we have been through with NCLB, and you've got to get your school's test scores up.
No child left behind.
Right. So many schools said, okay, we have to absolutely focus on reading and math, and that's all we're going to do, and we have to have kids in class as much as possible. And so that's what they did. I think what we all understand is that kids absolutely need that physical activity.
Yes,
Recess is a time
yes,
that, you know,
yes.
that's for a lot of kids their favorite time in the school
Yes,
day.
that's release. Yay! That's a break. And you know, we're all now told
honing our social
not
skills.
just to sit there at the computer, but get up and move. And for I'm thinking muscle development.
Exactly. But you know, I visited Chinese schools a couple of years ago, and they begin their school day in China with about a half an hour of exercises for the kids. And they believe not only is it good physical activity, but it really helps them center themselves so that when they go into the classroom, they're really in a position that they physically are ready to learn as well.
So we now have what, a 6-hour day for education, 5 days a week?
Yep, just about.
And I think in maybe Asian countries, it might be a longer day without the 3 months vacation.
Yeah, I mean,
so how will that be changing?
In the United States, well, in California, and I think throughout most of the United States, we have a 180 school day year. And that's based upon a very, very outmoded agricultural economy where kids needed to be helping their families harvest crops and plant crops, et cetera. That's obviously not our world anymore. If we think about countries like Singapore, Korea, Japan, they tend to have 210, 215, 220 day school year.
No
So that-
wonder they're doing so much
well,
better, huh?
they absolutely have more time. The other thing that those countries are doing that we have not been doing as good a job of is they really believe that teaching is an honored profession, and their very, very best students go into teaching. They spend a great deal of time. You think about how we train doctors in the United States with the internship and the residency, working with master doctors. That's how they train teachers in their countries as well.
And do their teachers get as much as their athletes?
I don't know if that's the case anywhere.
That's a very good question.
But they're highly paid. Highly paid?
They're well paid.
Well paid.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, because they're valued in the economy. The other thing that's different too in many of those countries is in our schools, the teacher arrives at school and very shortly thereafter the kids arrive, and the kids and the teacher are there together, and then the day is done. And in a lot of other countries, teachers spend probably 3 to 4 hours with direct student contact, and they have the other part of the day for planning and working together and really honing in on what individual students need. We don't have that built into our system, and I think one of the things that we've been really looking at, and why I think the STEM Center is so great, is we're saying how can we change how we use time in our school day so that we can be sure that our teachers are getting the time that they need that's tremendously valuable to help them plan to meet student needs.
Well, talking about the length of the school day, there is legislation. Has there been legislation that would start the day later? For example, teenagers need more sleep. And so rather than getting to school at 8, maybe they start at 9 or 10.
So those decisions are made at the local school board level. So I have 2 kids who go to Sequoia High School, and the Sequoia High School District Board said, you know, we've seen that research that shows that teenagers really are not at their optimal level of function at 8 a.m. in the morning. They would be better off starting at 9. And they have very consciously figured out how to change the start time of school, make sure that everybody's still getting what they need. But they're finding that the kids are much more alert and much more engaged in their studies because of that later start time.
So you talk about the Sequoia School District. Is this something that's spreading, or is that just for a few?
I think it comes up in different places, and I mean, it sometimes
on the
starts,
leadership.
in my experience, at an individual school level, and it's staff saying, you know what, maybe they don't want to make the day longer, but for example, maybe they have students are leaving early one Wednesday a month, and they're getting that one Wednesday, they get a little extra plan time together, but they say as a staff, we'd really benefit from that being every Wednesday. What can we do to figure that out? And those are, I think, really exciting moments, because that is coming organically from the schools and out of a real need to serve students better. But I think it sort of peppers. You know, when I was in that experience, it did spread actually in our little district. Others, oh, you're doing that? How are you doing that? Tell me about your plan.
And how is that working? And if the students start earlier here or later here, how does that affect maybe the rest of their schedule, and does everything else have to be coordinated? For example, when they go to after-school activities.
Well, I think what
those start later.
you're surfacing is that they're very difficult moves to make. Usually they really involve engaging all the constituents.
The parents. Parents don't want their kids to be home when they're not home, so they need to have a similar work schedule in order, or there has to be some kind of care in the morning for kids before school if their parents have to drop them off. Sometimes you get parents dropping their kids off an hour before school starts.
Sure.
Because they have no other choice.
And that reminds me, for example, talking about busing, and you said you were surprised coming to California, Rebecca, that there wasn't a lot of busing. And I know for one school district, the Ravenswood City School District, which doesn't have a high school, a local public high school, that's changing. The students are bused to various schools, maybe 4 or 5 different schools in the district, and the students have to be on the street corners at 6 o'clock in the morning.
And spend a long...
And so when you think of starting school later so that they can sleep, it seems like these students are starting off with a big handicap right there, having to get up maybe at 5 in the morning. And when do they have time at night to get all of their work done if they have to rise so early to catch the school bus?
I've often thought that about the students who ride the voluntary transfer buses, is that some of them are, especially younger kids, are on the bus for up to 2 hours, but from the time they leave, their home and get to their school, and then they are at school, and then they do the exact same thing on the way home as well. So I do think the Sequoia High School District, as it's looking at its boundaries, is certainly trying to help that, so that students, because of the way that the whole boundary situation worked out, students from East Palo Alto are riding a very long ways away to Belmont to go to Carlmont. Now with the new distribution of the boundaries, those students will be they can go to Carlmont if they would like, but they can go to the nearest school, which is Menlo Atherton. And I would say the other thing that Sequoia is doing is looking at the idea of building a small high school in East Palo Alto. And one other area of their school district, thinking that absolutely there needs to be a public high school in East Palo Alto. And the whole idea of a smaller school that really personalizes services to kids is going to be a really wonderful one, I think, to explore and to develop.
Sure. Now, when will we see improvements? And when you talk about improvements, I guess we have to know where we are now. So where are we now? And what's the goal incrementally? And I guess it will have to be incrementally, right?
Well, it's going to be very interesting to watch, because if you think about where we've been and how we've measured student progress, in California, we've primarily done that through the STAR testing system, which was a multiple choice, fill in the blank type of a test that was measuring very discrete skills. And we are now, with the Common Core content standards, moving to a whole different way of testing kids that's called Smarter Balance Assessment. All students will take that test on the computer. It's what's called a computer adaptive test, so that if I'm a 3rd grader and I'm taking my math test and I'm getting all my questions right, it's going to start giving me harder and harder questions, so it can figure out where my learning level really is. And if I'm not getting my answers correct, it's going to adjust me downward again, so that we can figure out where students are.
Now, that assumes that all students will be familiar with how to use the computer.
That's exactly right. Yeah. You're right.
Another element.
And that's a huge
another
issue right now. And all of our schools, we're just about next week to start the first testing window of the field test of Smarter Balance. And our schools have been scrambling to be sure that they can effectively test every student with some type of a device that's compatible with the test. And I've spent quite a bit of time in our schools looking at this situation. My guess is that most of our schools will be able to get through the testing period this spring, but they're only doing 20% of the test because they're testing the test. We won't get results back on individual students or schools. It's really a test of the test. But if we fast forward a year from now, where this test is completely done on the computer and all the kids in the school are taking the test, whether our schools have the devices, the network infrastructure, the bandwidth connectivity that they need to do that is a huge issue.
Now, in talking about tests, I heard about the SATs, that they are fundamentally changed now. And so what does that mean? And what can high school students expect? And what difference will it make?
know if we know all the answers to these yet, but I know that there was a lot of questions about that when Smarter Balance came up, and Common Core is changing what we teach. So there were a lot of kids, students, and teachers and parents saying, well, what happens? How are colleges going to translate this new information, and how are we going to do that? And the SATs are changing. And one of the writers of the Common Core is very involved in the SATs. So there is a lot of connection and crossover there, and Anne can probably talk a little bit more about that. But I would hope that, I mean, I think we're in a very mushy time right now. At the County Office of Education, we spent a lot of time this August and September visiting schools to give trainings, to give professional development on the Smarter Balanced Assessment. And it was so funny because, you know, you would go to a school on a Monday, and then by Thursday we would have new information about the Smarter Balanced Assessment. So we are really adapting very, very quickly, and I imagine that once one thing changes, it filters to all levels, and the SAT are one of those levels that it will then filter to.
And I would just continue with what Rebecca was talking about with the SAT. I think that the evidence shows, again, if we talk about an opportunity gap, that if I live in a community where my parents can afford to send me to test prep classes, I can increase my test score. If I don't have that opportunity, it may not accurately be measuring what I know. And from what I understand, with the changes to the SAT, which has been known as the Scholastic Aptitude Test, it's really moving more into the realm of trying to measure what kids have learned in school and what they know. And are they graduating high school with the content and the skills that the colleges really want them to have.
Now, we have talked about an equity gap in terms of those from more affluent neighborhoods and those from lower income neighborhoods, but we haven't talked about the gap between males and females and how they're doing, what they're concentrating on, and what's being done to move more females along. So, how do we talk about that gap? And there is a gap. There is a gap?
I'm not sure that there's such a large achievement gap anymore between girls and boys, and I think that in math classes and that girls' math achievement has come up, and I think in some places they're actually exceeding boys right now. I think the issue becomes much more, do they then choose to go into those math science fields? And that, you know,
I think there are definitely more women in college now.
There are
males.
more women entering college than
But
males.
are there more women entering the science, technology, engineering, and math fields?
No, we were just talking about that in a last week, an important research document that came out about how low the amount of women going into these fields is. And here in the county office, we've been trying to focus intentionally our efforts on girls in science and STEM. We have a robotics training course that we give to teachers, and we also have a partnership with learningtech.org, and they do a lot of work with Ravenswood City School District and the Cabrillo and Pacifica out on the coast, and they specifically target girls to be doing robotics and computer science and kind of getting that love for the sciences and STEM early in, you know, K-8 all the way up through 12th grade.
What difference will it make? We've talked about why decreasing that equity gap makes a difference. What difference will it make in terms of getting more women into technology fields, science?
Well, right now there's a huge need, women or otherwise, for more qualified people for jobs that are going unfilled, especially in computer science. It's just absolutely exploding. And there are something like over 1 million job opportunities, but we are only graduating a couple 100,000.
Now, are those jobs being filled by people from other countries?
I think some of them are, but I think a lot of them are going unfilled. Oracle has, I think, 1,000 job openings that are going unfilled.
Job openings like what?
I can tell you just from a very personal perspective, my husband is an entrepreneur and runs a web startup, and they're always hiring, and it's really hard to find people who have the skill set that they need. And so we always joke that, you know, I probably should have become a coder because I would have been able to write my salary right now because it's in such high demand. So I think that really would have a very big impact. And we're also reading what Kristen was referencing in this research article about the need for getting more women into these jobs isn't just because the jobs exist and they need to be filled, but also because women bring a unique perspective to those roles. And there has been some interesting, a lot of interesting news articles lately about when you bring a woman in, how that changes the perspective and that brings new opportunities to the business or to the team.
So can we be more specific? There was a time, I'm thinking during the height of the women's lib movement, that men's brains and women's brains were the same. So, and I think it's shown that when you have more men in a society, you have more war in the society. So what's the difference now? What kind of perspective are women bringing that's such a game changer?
I wish I could remember the specific. They had interviewed many CEOs and founders in this particular article I was reading, and they were commenting on the different things that were brought to the table. But one of the things I remember from the article was talking about listening. And at the team meetings, bringing women into the team helped them realize that they were not listening to each other as much in the meetings as they were waiting to speak or getting their points across, and that it had changed the climate.
What, the women weren't listening to each other, or the men weren't listening?
The men weren't before the woman joined the team. So I don't know if that's the case all the time, but that was that particular founder's take on it.
Well, we talked, at least when I started the show, I talked about the new changes. Have we talked about those new changes in education? Have we left something out? Is there something still to be shared in terms of what's going on that's going to make a difference?
I think one thing we haven't talked a lot about is if you think about the impact of technology in classrooms, how do we as educators really figure out how to bring technology into the classroom in a way that helps us to personalize learning for kids? Because I think we have the capacity and the potential to do that in ways that we haven't before, and yet not lose that relationship and personal part of what education is all about as well. So I think it's a fascinating time right now as we kind of figure out how do we do this. And we talk about disruptive change and how that happens in different sections of our economy and society. My sense is that technology probably is going to be that disruptive change for education.
Disruptive. Very few people like disruption.
A lot of people like it.
It has such a negative connotation. And we're talking about change.
We are.
And so change is always difficult, but you've been talking about some of the changes that are going on that will make a difference, a very positive difference. And so we'll just have to see over time the difference it's going to make in terms of the achievement of the children that you're dealing with. And I'd certainly like to thank you.
Thank you.
For bringing your perspectives in terms of the changes going on and the disruption that might come. And so any more to be said in terms of disruption and change and the difference it's making?
I think what I hope will happen from that disruption and that change is we've spent a lot of time in our conversation this evening talking about the opportunity gap and the achievement gap and how is America comparing to the rest of the world, that if we can disrupt education in a positive way, that it will move us that much farther ahead and be in a much more positive force.
That's a great note to end on, disruption as a positive force. And I'd like to certainly thank you for bringing all of this to our attention. And I'd certainly like to thank our viewers for watching. Until next time.